We're going to make history. We're gonna make history.
Hello, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today, we're covering the case of Cassie Jo Stoddart. As the warning at the beginning of this video says, we're going to be talking about a story that includes real clips. This doesn't mean there will be violent images or anything like that, but do keep in mind that the people who will appear are connected to the case and are involved in this crime. That said, up there on the screen, you can see the rest of my cases. Down here are my social media accounts in case you want to follow me on any of them. And with nothing more to add, let's get started. Cassie Jo Stoddart was born on December 21st, 1989, in Idaho, United States. She was born and raised in the city of Pocatello and was the daughter of Ann Stoddart. She also had two siblings, Christy, who was 6 years older, and Andrew, who was 2 years younger. Cassie's family was very close-knit. Her brother Andrew describes her as determined and a role model. He remembers spending a lot of time with her, since they were so close in age. They went out together to many places and shared the same interests. One of Cassie's passions was the arts, specifically music and painting. She spent many hours a week in her room listening to music and drawing. When she reached her teenage years, Cassie started attending Pocatello High School. There, she stood out as an excellent student. She always got the best grades in the class. She also participated in several extracurricular activities. Because of her kind and outgoing personality, Cassie got along very well with almost everyone in her class. In 2006, a few months before the events, Cassie started dating a classmate named Matt Beckham, who later became her boyfriend. Among her classmates were also those who would become her killers. We're talking about Brian Lee Draper and Tori Michael Adamczyk. As we already mentioned, Cassie got along with everyone in her class, and both Draper and Adamczyk were friends with Matt, Cassie's boyfriend. So she ended up becoming friends with them too, without knowing the terrible fate that awaited her. So let's talk a little about these two individuals. Draper was born on March 21st, 1990. He was the son of Pam and Carrie Draper. He grew up in the state of Utah, but when he reached his teenage years, they moved to Idaho. During his childhood, Draper suffered from a slight stutter. That was enough for him to become a victim of bullying by his classmates. That definitely had a significant impact on his growth and development. When he became a teenager, everything he had suffered as a child was reflected in his personality. Let me remind you, in any case, that when we mention these kinds of things, it's not to justify the actions that were committed, nor is it enough to understand the reasoning of someone who commits these types of crimes. It's only to provide context before discussing the events. Adamczyk, for his part, was born on June 14, 1990, in Pocatello and was the son of Shannon and John Adamczyk. And honestly, there isn't much information about him. It's known that after Draper moved to Idaho, he met Adamczyk at Pocatello High School. The two became best friends since they shared many interests, especially their passion for movies, particularly horror and murder films that were really popular in the 90s and early 2000s. Besides their interests, Draper and Adamczyk were also very similar in terms of their personalities. Both of them were pretty introverted and didn't have many friends, so they spent most of their time together, both at school and outside of it. After a while, they started recording everything they could. Their fanaticism and obsession with movies and filmmaking led them to record everything they did, and then they had the idea of making some kind of movie out of it. Over time, this hobby of recording things started to get darker and darker, and they began to have the twisted idea of actually recreating the murders they saw in the movies. So when classes started in 2006, they began planning how to carry out this idea, taking inspiration from the movie Scream. In case you haven't seen it or don't remember, it's a movie where there's a killer going around murdering a bunch of teenagers, and it turns out the culprit is one of the classmates and his friend. Basically, Draper and Adam Checky wanted to kill their classmates, and they had already chosen their first victim, Cassie.
You weren't quick enough.
You weren't quick enough, and you weren't smart enough. Snooped around her house a couple times. She's not home, so we're gonna go to the church over there, and we're gonna call a girl and a guy named Cassie and Matt. They're our friends, but we have to make sacrifices. So, and I feel like I want to kill somebody. Matt will come out, investigate, kill him, and it will scare the shit out of Cassie. She's our friend, but you know what? We all have to make sacrifices. Find out if she has friends over. She's gonna be alone in a big, dark house out in the middle of nowhere. How perfect can you get? I heard some news about Kirsten. She's gonna be home alone from 6 to 7. We might kill her, then drive over to Cassie's thing and scare the shit out of them.
You're evil.
Yes, I am. Psychopaths do not get pleasure of killing other people.
That sounds...
We're gonna be just like Scream. Let's see, Ted Bundy, like the Hillside Strangler,
No.
the Zodiac Killer.
Those people are more amateurs compared to what we're gonna be. Saw a girl walking down the street, right?
Yeah.
2 questions came to his head. I could take her out, have a nice time with her, or I wonder what her head would look like on a stick.
Holy shit.
That's creepy,
Yes.
huh?
Holy shit. Murder is power, murder is freedom. Goodbye.
I don't know.
Hey, look, I don't know.
Hello, Cassie. Say hi, please.
Hi.
Okay, see ya.
It is then, under this context, that we move on to the day of the events. It was September 22nd, 2006. Cassie went out to look after her aunt and uncle, Allison and Frank Contreras, for the weekend. The house, which was pretty big, was located on the outskirts of town. Cassie's aunt and uncle asked her to take care of their 3 cats and 2 dogs. Cassie was a very responsible girl, and she also loved animals, so this was a great opportunity for her. So she invited her boyfriend, Matt Beckham, to keep her company. It was the perfect chance to spend some time together, and she also felt safer having someone with her in such a big house so far from the city. Matt arrived around 6 in the evening, just before sunset. It's not entirely clear, but according to the investigation, Cassie and Matt invited Draper over to watch movies with them since they knew he was a huge movie fan. Then Draper ended up inviting Adam Chick as well. Once Draper and Adam Chick arrived, around 7 in the evening, Cassie gave them a tour of the house. It was during this tour that they took the opportunity to find an entrance to the house and made sure the basement door was unlocked so they could get in later. Then they all went together to watch Kill Bill Volume 2. They watched the movie for a while, but before it ended, Draper told them that he and Adam Check had to leave. They said they wanted to see another movie at the theater, and that they would be late for the showing. So they said goodbye and left the house around 10 at night. Obviously, the whole thing about going to the movies was just an excuse. Draper and Adam Check parked their car on a street near the house. Inside the vehicle, they started putting on what looked like costumes for the occasion, made up of dark clothing, gloves, and masks. They also had with them some knives they had bought a few days earlier. It was clear they were ready to carry out their plan. They then entered the house through the basement door, which they had previously made sure was left open. Meanwhile, Cassie and her boyfriend were still upstairs watching the movie. For their part, Draper and Adam Chick stayed in the basement for a few minutes. Apparently, they didn't really know how to go about committing the murder. First, they wanted to scare him, as if it were a horror movie. However, Cassie and Matt didn't pay much attention to the noises they were making. After this failed attempt to lure them to the basement, they decided to try other measures. They turned off the circuit breaker in the house, leaving it completely in the dark. This still didn't make Cassie and Matt go downstairs. So Adam Chick and Draper turned some of the lights back on, but not all of them. Cassie started to get a little scared about staying alone in the house, especially with these strange power outages, so she asked her boyfriend if he could stay. Matt decided to call his mom to ask if he could spend the night with Cassie at that house to help her feel better. However, his mom said no, and instead offered for Cassie to come sleep at their house. But she turned down this option since her aunt and uncle had entrusted her with the responsibility of taking care of the pets in the house. She didn't want to abandon all her responsibilities just because she was feeling a little scared. Around 10:30 at night, Matt's mom came to pick him up from the house. He called Adamczyk to see where he and Draper were, since maybe they could do something together. When Adamczyk answered, his voice was so low that Matt could barely hear him. He then assumed they were at the movies, like they had said. The last thing he imagined was that they were answering him from the basement of the house where Cassie was. Draper and Adamczyk heard Matt leaving, and when he called, they were 100% sure that Cassie was alone and defenseless. They could finally carry out their twisted fantasy. Once again, they turned off the electricity in the house. Once more, Cassie refused to go down to the basement. This time, the boys slowly went up the stairs, sneaking closer. They stalked her for several minutes. Cassie was lying on the couch. She was nervous since she was alone in the house and there was no light. Draper and Adamczyk took advantage of this opportunity and carried out the murder. They lunged at Cassie and started stabbing her. In total, they stabbed her more than 30 times. After committing this brutal murder, they left Cassie's body on the couch and fled in the car.
I just killed Cassie. We just left her house. This is not a fucking joke. I stabbed her in the throat and I saw her lifeless body just disappear. That felt like it wasn't real. I mean, it went by so fast.
Shut the fuck up. We gotta get our act straight.
No one knew about Cassie's murder until 2 days later, when her aunt and uncle returned to the house and found the terrifying scene of Cassie's blood-covered body in the living room. During those days, Matt tried to get in touch with Cassie, but for obvious reasons, he couldn't. Once her family discovered the body, they called the police, who, of course, started investigating right away. They collected as much evidence and as many samples from the crime scene as they could. The autopsy revealed that Cassie's body had a total of 31 stab wounds and cuts, and that 12 of those stab wounds were fatal, which ultimately caused her death. The police began their investigation by interviewing Matt Beckham, Cassie's boyfriend. This is standard procedure in cases like this. They start by interviewing people in the victim's close circle. Up to that point, you could say that what they knew was that he was the last person to see her alive. He told them everything that happened that night, including the fact that Draper and Adamczyk were with them. So the next people on the investigation list were those two. The detectives visited Adamczyk's house on September 24th to interview him. He told them that they did go to Cassie's house that night, or at least to her aunt and uncle's house, but that they went thinking it was going to be a party. When they saw there wasn't going to be a party, they decided to leave and go see a movie at the theater. However, when they asked him what movie they had seen or what it was about, Adamczyk couldn't answer. At that point, he changed his story and simply said that after leaving the house, Draper and he went to his place for the rest of the night, and that Draper spent the night there. The investigators obviously noticed the inconsistency in a statement. That's when they went to interview Draper separately. He told the police that he and Adamczyk went to see a movie at a theater after leaving Cassie's house. He said they arrived too late for the movie they wanted to see, but decided to stay anyway to watch another one. However, it happened again, and he, just like his friend, couldn't explain the plot of the movie at all. 2 days later, investigators brought Draper in for a second interview. This time the interrogation was a bit more serious. Even though Draper stuck to his original story, the investigators doubted that they had actually gone to see a movie after leaving. Draper changed his story and said that they actually went to the theater and were checking out cars in the parking lot to steal things. The investigators didn't believe this story either. Even so, they still didn't have any evidence linking them to Cassie's murder, but the suspicions about them kept growing. A search warrant was then issued for Draper's house. The police discovered an empty knife sheath in the boy's room. When they asked him about it, he claimed that the knife belonged to a friend of his. Finally, the next day, Draper was interrogated for a third time. This was the decisive one. He broke down and confessed everything. He admitted that he and Adamczyk had unlocked the basement doors so they could get into the house later that night, but claimed they only did it to scare Cassie. He said they wore masks, gloves, black clothes, and carried knives. He also told investigators that once they went upstairs, Adamczyk started stabbing. Draper thought Adamczyk was just doing it to scare her, but then realized it wasn't a joke and that he was actually killing her. Even so, he insisted that he never touched Cassie, much less stabbed her. He also said that Adamczyk had threatened to kill him if he talked. And in an attempt to save himself from a harsher sentence, Draper agreed to show investigators where they hid the evidence. Draper then led investigators to the place where they had buried the evidence. There were several items there, most notably the clothes they had worn to commit the murder, and a videotape showing how they planned the killing. After finding all this evidence, both Draper and Adamczyk were arrested as the main suspects in Cassie's murder. Before we get to the trial and explain what happened to these two people, I want to pause for a moment here to talk a bit about what happens in these cases, especially with killer copycats. In this story, something unusual happens. They were directly inspired by the killers from a movie, and things did not turn out at all like they expected. Because, well, let's agree that reality is not the same as fiction. There's another similar case that some of you might remember about a man who wanted to imitate the killer Dexter from the Fox series, thinking that they were the same and that he had a mind as cold and calculating as Dexter's, so he could pull off these murders without any problem, but everything ended up going completely the opposite way. Obviously, it wasn't like he thought it would be. He had written a diary in which he saw himself as a very intelligent person and thought everyone else was an idiot, but in the end, it became clear that he wasn't at all how he saw himself. In fact, it was quite the opposite. But the point of all this is that I think so many series, movies, and documentaries, as well as some of the portrayals we do here on YouTube about these kinds of cases, can end up making these characters, these very real people, these killers, seem appealing. It can make them seem mysterious, interesting, and intelligent, when in reality, that's often not the case. A good number of serial killers who got away with it for a long time did so because of police incompetence, lack of technology, or because they were white. I say that last part completely seriously, and keeping in mind that the most prolific serial killer known to date is Pedro Alonso Lopez, or the Monster of the Andes, a Colombian man who is clearly not a blonde white guy like Jeffrey Dahmer, for example. We could also add Luis Garavito here, who is actually believed to have more victims than the Monster of the Andes, and both are Colombian. But let's say skin color also played a role in many cases. What I mean is that a lot of these killers just got lucky. Many times, these people that certain individuals want to imitate aren't actually as smart as the media or we make them out to be. I'm reflecting on this based on my own comments on YouTube. For example, in this video, which I'll also link in the eye on the screen, it's about a case where a 10-year-old girl kills her classmate. In that video, I got several occasional comments that were clearly from underage kids, saying they feel hatred toward their classmates or other people, and that they wouldn't feel any remorse if they killed them. I feel like most of those comments are just trying to be edgy, trying to come off as dangerous, like those psychopaths they see in fiction and think are cool. Most likely, that kind of thinking will pass with time, and later they'll feel secondhand embarrassment when they look back and remember it. But there are some people who keep seeing things that way even after they're 12, and try to do something like what these young people did, and others we've already talked about on the channel. Several others. They seriously think that killing is fun, that it could be interesting, that they can get away with it, when in reality, none of those things are true. The truth is, it almost never goes well. They kill someone and the idea eats them up inside. Obviously, they can't think things through calmly like they thought they would. They can't come up with a plan to cover up what happened, and then they regret it, cry, and even throw up at the sight of what they've done. In the end, they weren't as tough as those criminals they saw on the internet or on TV. It wasn't so easy to do terrible, twisted things. Serial killers like Jeffrey Dahmer or Ted Bundy could have been caught much sooner if they had looked different. They were partly caught because they were so careless and took it for granted that others wouldn't suspect them enough. Not because they were incredibly smart or outwitted investigators with precision. For example, these would-be serial killers I'm showing you today killed someone, didn't do anything they had planned, and then, almost at the end of the tape they recorded, one of them said, "We need to calm down and act clearly," only to later tell the police they'd watched a movie and not even know what it was about. Up to that point, they thought their plan was foolproof because they had planned it so much and wanted to make history. This kind of thinking has also led to school shootings. One of the most famous ones that drew a lot of attention was the one you probably already know about, Columbine, which, because of how it was covered by the media, later led more young people to want to do the same thing. And it wasn't the supposedly violent video games that were blamed back then, it was how the media chose to talk about the issue. These criminals who carried out the Columbine shooting were portrayed as avengers for the underdogs, for the outcasts at school who turned to violence because they had been mistreated. We need to demystify the killers we see because at the end of the day, many of them weren't smart or brilliant or mysterious. They were just people who, given the circumstances, were harder to catch. What I'm telling you now isn't anything new. It's something that comes up every time a new documentary series about a serial killer is released, where an actor plays the killer and tries to recreate how they behaved or the things they did. In short, what I want you to do is look at these copycat killers and understand that they weren't smart, that it's neither fun nor entertaining to imitate serial killers, and that it never turns out the way you expect. Being a serial killer isn't fun. They're truly disturbed people, usually with terrible pasts. Draper and Adamczyk were tried separately in 2 different trials. Apparently, Draper's defense strategy was to put most of the blame on Adamczyk. However, the evidence against both of them was overwhelming. The tapes they recorded themselves showed that both of them wanted to carry out the murder, that they planned it for months, and that they felt no remorse whatsoever. You could also tell how euphoric they were in the recordings they made just minutes after committing the crime, and they even noted that if they had the chance, they would do it again. Additionally, in these same recordings, they said that even though Cassie was their main target, if they had needed to kill Matt, they would have done it. Thus, the first trial that took place was Draper's, and he was found guilty of the first-degree murder of Cassie Stoddart and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Adamczyk's trial took place a few months later, and his sentence was exactly the same. To this day, they are still serving their sentences. They tried several times to appeal their sentences, but were denied at almost every level. Even today, there is still debate over whether both of them were equally guilty and responsible, since many people say that Adamczyk was the one with the twisted ideas and that Draper was really just a very impressionable and easily manipulated kid. But regardless, the truth is that both of them committed a brutal murder and were sentenced accordingly. So let me know what you think in the comments. I'm reading them, and that's where we'll wrap up the video. That's all for today. Here are the Patreons and channel members. Thank you for supporting me through those platforms, and with nothing more to add, here's a new video and here's a recommended video. You can subscribe by clicking on my face, and I'll see you in another video. Goodbye.